here we have some React code, and if you know exactly what will be printed as a result of it, then this video is not for you. Otherwise, we first of all try to have a detailed answer to why we get this result by reminding ourselves how the logical AND operator works, how React prints expressions with primitive values, and we're going to refresh our knowledge of coercion versus casting. And then later we're going to find 3 ways to deal with this issue. All right, so instead of getting hello, we get 0. So why do we get 0? Let's look at logical AND operator. So logical AND operator consists of the left-hand side expression and right-hand side expression. So whenever the left-hand side expression evaluates to any falsy value, the whole logical AND expression evaluates to that falsy value. Otherwise, the whole logical AND expression evaluates to the right-hand side value. So let's imagine this is our React create element, is our kind of React library, right? So we know this JSX syntax will be converted to the React.createElement calls by the transpiler. So let's play around with the logical AND operator expression. So when we try undefined, we get undefined. If we try null, we get null. If we try false, we get false. If we try empty string, we get empty string. And finally, if we try 0, we get 0. So if the left-hand side, though, evaluates to any truthy value, like true, for example, then the whole logical AND expression evaluates to the value of the right-hand side. In our case, it's a function call that prints console log hello. And here we expect to get a component when we get a truthy value here. But because we just demonstrated that for every falsy value, the logical AND operator will return the value of the left-hand side. So when the length is 0, it will return 0. Okay, so we answered the first question about logical AND operator. Now let's take a look how React prints expressions with primitive values. So if we try to print various primitive values, particularly falsy values, we're gonna see that React not gonna print undefined, React not gonna print null, neither will it print false. It's not gonna print an empty string either, but 0, it does print 0. Because 0 is a valid number, so that's why it's the only value among those falsy values that makes sense to visualize if we don't think whether it's falsy value or not. Finally, the third part here is to talk about coercion versus casting. So what is coercion? So JavaScript is a dynamic programming language. And in the dynamic programming language, the types exist, but we don't really check them until the runtime. Comparing to the statically typed languages, where we check them at the compile time. Logical AND operator requires the left-hand side and right-hand side to be evaluated to some Boolean values. And in the statically typed programming languages, when we check the types during the compilation, logical AND operator cannot be used with things like null or undefined. You would always need to either cast them explicitly to a Boolean or to create an expression that will evaluate to a Boolean value. Since JavaScript is a dynamically typed programming language, JavaScript is able to convert types implicitly, meaning that all those falsy values, they are converted to a Boolean value. So either way, they kind of like all of them, for the sake of the logical AND operator, they will be considered to be a Boolean. But the result still will be what they evaluate into. So now we have all the kind of bits and pieces to really understand what is going on. The most common advice a lot of developers usually give is to use ternary operator, since with a ternary operator, we're not gonna shoot ourselves in the foot by printing 0, since we give two choices to React. When expression before the question mark evaluates to any false value, we're gonna print null. Otherwise, in this case, it will print hello whenever this part evaluates to any truth value. In this case, it returns 0, so it's a false value, so we get null. But if we put something inside this array, then we get expected hello. But it's just one way to deal with this problem. Even though we use a ternary operator and we don't shoot ourselves in the foot by printing this 0, coercion still takes place because length 0 is a number, it's not a Boolean. So conversion between the types happen, but it happens implicitly. And that's why it's perfectly fine to use logical AND. But just make sure that you do the conversion explicitly by casting. You either cast it to a Boolean or convert it to a normal Boolean expression. Even if you use the ternary operator, it still, in my opinion, makes sense to still have explicitly casting, either creating a Boolean expression or cast to a Boolean, just because it will increase, in my opinion, readability of the code. And then finally, there is this one more approach that been mentioned every now and then in the internet. I personally noticed that one of the teams at my work been using it with their React Native application. And I felt that in certain conditions, it could be quite elegant and nicer looking than using a ternary operator. And also, because of the TypeScript, we can enforce type safety of the expressions and do not rely on the coercion at all. What I mean is that we can use this render component. It will look like this. And the important part here is that because of the TypeScript, we have a type safety here. So if I provide if property, I'm forced to provide an expression that evaluates to a Boolean value. In other words, I cannot any longer write array.length since it's not a proper Boolean expression. So I would either need to provide it array.length more than 0 or cast it to a Boolean. And also I feel like using this component could be, to my taste, in some situations, it looks much nicer. Like if you have like one ternary operator in your whole application or like just a couple of them, maybe it's unnecessary to, of course, create the whole component just to show the things conditionally. But in my book, it really looks nice and quite organic, if you will, from the React perspective. So now you have all the options